when this gets extreme, there's also, people talk about malignant narcissism, and I think it seems almost on a continuum that can bleed into psychopathy. Is that a reasonable thing to say?
It's a very reasonable thing to say. The term malignant narcissism is a term that captures narcissism plus really meanness. So somebody who's narcissistic and is actually going out with some sort of sadistic intent. And psychopathy psychopathy and narcissism are cousins. They share that sort of core, in the big five, they share that low agreeableness, that core antagonism, that core lack of empathy. The difference seems to be that people are psychopathic, don't have as many ego needs, they're more predatory, then sort of they don't need the attention, they don't need the admiration, they don't need the feedback, they just go out and take whatever they want like predators. There's a lot of the same way, so there's 3 ways we talk about narcissism, there's 3 or 4 ways we talk about psychopathy too, so I'm going to skip that part, but generally they share this core. The difference is, and why narcissism is considered almost sort of less dangerous than psychopathy, is people who are narcissistic want positive social attention. So that's you're like, if you do this, we'll love you, and if you do this, we'll hate you. Well, they'll do what they want it to be loved. But people with psychopaths, that's not as important, so you don't even have that control mechanism. But they're very similar disorders, and some people would say that narcissism is almost a subtype of psychopathy. So,
yeah. And does this relate to the dark triad?
Yeah. I'll step back just. You didn't even ask this, but if you look in the clinical manual, the diagnostics, the DSM, psychopathy isn't in there because we have narcissism and antisocial personality disorder, but they kept psychopathy out because they all correlate and they had too much of that. The dark triad is a term that came out of personality psychology. A guy named Del Paulus at British Columbia came up with this idea. And the dark triad, the darkness refers to that core, low antagonism, or low agreeableness, high antagonism. So that's your core, that's the dark. And the triad are 3 traits. One of those is narcissism, grandiose narcissism. One of those is psychopathy. And the other trait that makes up the dark triad is Machiavellianism. And this is a trait in psychology that really refers to manipulativeness and kind of game playing. It comes from the name, from Machiavelli, from The Prince. So if you read The Prince, and it's really a much better book than people make it sound, but it's the idea of how do you manipulate people to get what you want. So the idea is Machiavellianism is about manipulativeness. They've added another trait, and now they talk about a dark tetrad. And the 4th trait they've added is sadism. And sadism is like that malignant narcissism, but sadism is people who not just are mean, but take pleasure in causing pain. So that's a trait you see a lot with online trolling. So trolls tend to be they're narcissistic, but really sadism is what picks out. And they've done some neat studies on that. So you get these really a host of traits that all share this dark kind of meanness to them, but they manifest it in different ways.
Right. And then there's also this idea of the light triad, right? Which isn't just the opposite of the dark triad.
Yeah, that's my buddy, Scott Barry Kaufman, who's a humanistic psychologist, tried to look at the other side and focused on things like humanism. And he had one that was Kantianism, which I didn't really understand, but sort of more. But the idea was, it wasn't just about not being mean. It was about a more positive approach to the world from a more humanistic perspective. I'd say the opposite side. So yeah, so you had a light triad. We've talked about a vulnerable dark triad, which has vulnerable narcissism, borderline personality disorder, which is antagonism and neuroticism. So it's the same piece. And then another form of psychopathy, a factor 2 psychopathy. So there are different ways you can kind of parse these up. But really, 5 big buckets work. I always think it's like you go to a Mexican restaurant, you got your buckets of food back there, and they can make anything you want out of the 5 big buckets.